to it. So the pin will add a cylinder, create cylinder, draw that out in the top, and draw it up, and then let's just adjust the size of the cylinder. So the radius we're going to do is make 2, and the height we're going to do is 20. And we can adjust the height segments. Right now it's 5. We'll just change that to 1. The less polygons you have, the easier it is for the physics engine to do the calculation. And then size 8 as opposed to 16. This is going to help things go a lot quicker. And so what we're going to do is we'll copy this, because this is going to be our bowling pin. And let me zoom in, and let's go and drag off a copy. Okay, move that over. And I think I'm going to do a whole bowling lane, but you can kind of get the idea slowly. We'll grab these and pull this all off and set up just a simple bowling lane. So you can do this with different pins. Now, the next thing we want is we want to create our bowling ball, which is going to be a sphere. And we're going to put this at the far end of the lane and move it up. And the settings for this is we're going to give it a radius of 10 and decrease the segments to 12. So once again, it's a lot smaller and easier to use. Now, what we need to do is we need to actually add it to a physics engine. And if you have an older version of Max, there's a physics engine called Reactor. 2013 they discontinued it, so they have a new version. It's not as developed as I'd like it, but it still works. So what we can do is we can open this up and we can look, and you can do some different options for doing cloth, rigid body, those types of things. So what we want to do is we want to start to give everything different types. So so the sphere, I just clicked it and you can see I have a FX rigid body. Dynamic means for the ball, yeah, dynamic. So we actually want to make that kinematic, which means we can animate it. We're going to select all the pins and do the same thing again, and they all have a modifier added to them. And let's go in and set these up. Actually, I should have done this beforehand. Dynamic, which basically is your default, which means that it will react to the ball hitting it. And let's get, I think this is the one I didn't get. Okay, so they're all set up. And then for the alley itself, we're going to add again, and instead of dynamic, we're going to do static. So what this is this plane won't go anywhere. So we got all those basics set up. And at this point, we need to animate the bowling ball, because if we go to actually test this right now, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to move. It's not going to go anywhere. So what we're going to do is we'll grab the ball and we'll do auto key. And we're going to move the slider to 5. Okay, and then we're going to move the ball across the scene. So now we basically have this very simple animation, nothing fancy at all. And what we want to do is now we can play the simulation. So let's pull up the, let me just double check. Okay, we got everything right there. Let's open up the FX toolbar once again. And okay, so here's our different controls. And we look, this is basically doing gravity, different settings with the engine, different settings you can do as far as how things are done. And if you kind of pop through, you can see here's our different controls for planning it, and also you can do the same settings and setup. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it. So reset simulation, start simulation without animation, and step through. So we want to basically do start simulation. And you can see what happens is it basically goes, and the only thing it does is it just does that little, it moves the ball just that distance. So what we need to do is we need to tell it to basically convert that into some type of energy. So so let's select the frame, and then what we want to do is we want to do kinematic until frame 4, and what that'll do is from 0 to 4 it'll move, and then on frame 5 it'll actually convert that into energy. So let's reset and do the simulation again. And now you can see we actually did it, and we knocked over the ball and the pin. Now the one thing that's happening is the ball actually is still on, you can see it in this view, it's still on the ground. So you can go in, you can do settings where you can basically turn off, use ground collision, you can turn that off, and now you can see the ball falls. So you can do a lot of fun with this, you can build walls, etc., but that's just the basic idea. And what we're going to do is we will reset it, and we want to come in and actually do what's called a bake. So if you want this simulation, if you want to actually be able to animate it, you need to do bake all. And what this will do is it'll add keys for everything. So just be aware, and now if I scrub through, I get the whole animation, but everything has a key because it's recording all the elements. And if you don't bake it, that's the only way you can render it out. So now that it's done, I can go and I can render it and I can actually save it. So that's the big thing, is basically you bring in different objects. You need one static plane that basically serves as the base, unless you have the, we talked about the ground collision on. And then we added some dynamic objects which basically respond to forces, and then we had one object that was kinetic, and we moved it and used that to create some force. So let's look at an example of this. There's some other stuff, so you can go to FX, but that kind of gives you basically some basic ideas. So let's go look at another one. So here's an example of particles, and this also has some rigid body stuff in it as well, so it's kind of a transition. So we got the ship flying here, and if we look, you see there's this belt of all these little objects, and we're going to fly into this asteroid field. This is from Star Wars Episode 2 as well. And what we're going to see is they're going to move into the field. Give them a second. Okay, there we go. Okay. So if you look, you can see there's all these objects. Now each of these is considered a particle, which is an individual element that's been generated. The cool thing is when this explosion goes off, if you watch, let's get it going. We're going to have an explosion in a second, and there we go. If you look, you can see the object smashing. So there's actually rigid body dynamics that are taking place that are taking that element, and when it explodes, they're taking that force and it's hitting other things, and they're breaking it apart into chunks, and then they're reacting and moving. So this is incredibly complicated dynamic simulation that they're using that's all computer generated. So they're kind of doing a show off, if you will, to get this to work. So let's look at some particles next. Now that we're done with the rigid body. So the other thing that people did is the volumetrics was simulating 2D to create the illusion of depth phenomena. And then basically people developed rigid body, and then they also did particles, and then the two of them got kind of combined to create some of the more technology that we look at nowadays. So there's two different types of particles, and we're just going to use the really basic ones. So if we do create particles, and you'll see particle flow source. This is invent-based particle system, which is fireworks. We don't get into this. It's kind of like visual programming, but if you want to, by all means. We're just going to use the spray, which is the most simple one. Just to let you know, these are all evolutions. So spray is the first one they developed, then snow, then blizzard. The array and the cloud are slightly different than super sprays, everything combined. So if you want to experiment with all the settings, that's that one. So let's grab spray and draw it out, and the instant I start to scrub, you'll see it starts generating particles. So the cool thing about it is this is called the emitter, and the emitter is generating different particles. And if we get this set up properly and we put the camera inside of it and we go to actually render it, we can get it to look something like it's actually raining. Now let's just do a simple. Now if I go to render just a single frame of this, okay, so you can see that's using the default blue, so you can assign the material, and then you can also adjust the speed. So if I hit play, you can see it's going at a certain speed. If I wanted to do snow, you can actually go in and change the speed. So if I knock this down to 3 and I go to hit play, now you can see, but you can see they're not lasting along, which is the life that they do it. So right now they're only lasting 30 frames. So if I increase this to 100 frames, and we go back and we go to play this again. Now you can see they're lasting long enough to actually be in the scene, but we're going to have to increase the animation, and we're also going to have to start rendering the animation around here because before that the snow isn't in the scene. So these are the basics. If I wanted to do more particles, there's a viewport, and also I can render it so you can increase. As far as size, that gets visibility. You don't want to do too much with this. If you do start messing around with it, the objects will get slightly bigger. So you can leave that alone if you want variations in speed, movement, etc. And all these are basically the little dots that move back and forth, and you can assign a material to this to change the color. So you can do some interesting things with it. You can also adjust the age over color, the color over time. So if I go into Render, Material Editor, Compact Material Editor, and we create a material, and we go into Diffuse, there's a camera map per pixel. Oh wait, that's just, yeah, particle age, and there's also a blur. Fortunately, you can only do one or the other. So we can say that at the beginning we want this to be, I don't know, green. This is kind of what you would do with a firework. Then it changed to some crazy yellow. And then we'll change it to, I don't know, some purple or something odd like that. So this is very strange. What we're going to do is we're going to take that material and assign it to the sprayer. And now if we go to render out even just a single frame, it's a little hard to see. Let me increase the sizes of these to something insane, like let's do 10, which is going to be really big. And streaky, you can see that we start as green, but as we move down, if I move this further out and the lifetime of the particles increases, the bottom ones should be approaching purple. So they're purple here, yellow here, and green here. So that's where we're getting the transition. So that's over the life of the particle. So this is at the end, which is 100%, which we defined by the life length. So this can be shorter or longer. And then we can do the different colors, and you can do materials. So there's a lot of different things you can kind of play around with. The most basic thing to do is to just bring in a image and then create the illusion of rain or snow or something like that if you want to play around with it. Now there's some different controls you can use to adjust these, and I'm just going to knock this down, and I'm going to increase the speed a little. And what we're going to create is there's different what they call space warp forces. So if we go into create, there's a whole collection of space warps, and there's forces, deflectors, geometric, dynamics. So there's different things you can kind of do and play around with, but we're just going to do a basic. We're just going to grab the vortex, and we'll draw it out in the top view. And now you can see we have this little vortex. Let me bring up this viewport, and let's make sure that it's inside of it. And at this point it's doing nothing because you have to bind the same way you have to do connects. We have to bind the tool, the emitter, to be influenced by this. So this is the icon for binding. So I'm going to go from there and go from there, and the instant you do that, now you see that this vortex is actually controlling the behavior of the particles. So you can do crazy stuff with this. There's wind, there's different things you can animate, and get some really interesting results. Okay, so we're back to the original version, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an object just like a sphere and draw it out in the top view. And then I'm going to create what's called a U deflector, and let me change the color of these particles so you can actually see them a little easier. And let's increase the size of this. Okay, so we got our sphere, and what we want to do is we want to make it so that the particles bounce off of this. So there is a type of space warp object deflector, U deflector, and if we just create one, and there it is. What we do is this basically takes the polygon vertices of this object and makes it dynamic. So we go pick object, and we'll go pick the sphere, and now the sphere is responsive, but we're not going to see anything until we attach this to this. At least it should be that, yeah, there's nothing happening yet. So we're going to select the plane, and we'll do a bind from that to there. And now if we slide it back and forth, you should notice that the particles, it's a little hard to see, but the particles are actually bouncing off of the surface when it hits them. So that's another interesting, and if I go to move this around dynamically and animate it, the particles will respond differently depending on where it is. So you can do some pretty interesting things with that if you like. And then let me show you the super spray emitter. Let's go to the other end basically. So let's get rid of this and this, and actually create space warp. Oh, let's go back to particles and grab the super spray. And the super spray has a lot more controls, but as you'll see, it also takes a lot more to kind of get it working. So here's our basic. We have it set up. Actually, let me maximize. And I'm going to add an object of just a teapot, and we'll put the teapot right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the settings of this emitter, and I'll do a couple things. I'll increase the spread a little bit, and the spread this way, so get a little bit more variety. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, you know what, I want a mesh. And that's going to say, well, what type of mesh do you want? So we got to open up particle type, and we want to use a standard particle. And what we want is instance geometry, which is basically an object. It's going to ask us what. And I have the teapot. Oh, wait, sorry about that. Go back, pick object, pick the teapot, and now you see it's actually generating teapots. So you can do some pretty cool things. If you've seen Terminator 2 and the Mercury Man, that's what are called metaparticles or metaballs, which basically glop together so you can create the illusion of things like lava, which we'll actually look at right now. So let's take a look at the opening sequence from Shrek. So, okay, so we're coming out. And the interesting thing, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is this is all basically special types of particles called fur that are generating in here. That's physics, dynamics. But what we're looking at is there's a particle emitter giving some bugs that are flying around, volumetric light. And now we're going to go, and if we look at that, that was using the metaparticles that basically were glopping together to create the illusion of water. And there's also real-time physics. And then when he does the mud, those are basically particles that are being emitted by an emitter that's inside the bucket. And then basically Shrek is a U deflector. And then they're just doing different things with different types of particles. So this whole opening is basically a show off of what they can do with their particles and their emitters and how dynamic they can make them, which is pretty neat. So let's so once you have particles, the next thing you get above that is if you can create a chain of particles that are all hooked to each other, you basically have fur. So so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a simple sphere. And I'm just going to go in, and this is pretty easy. You just the hair and fur, and then you do that. Now you see we have hair and fur. And if I go to render this out, it does what's called a post-process render, which actually renders the fur. And then we can come in and we can do all types of things. So depending on what I select the top part of this, and then we vertex. Update selection. Now we only have hair in certain parts, so you can draw different, you can do styling, you can increase the counts, the density, the scale, all types of things, the length, thicknesses. So you can do a lot of interesting things. You can play around with the material properties of this. So if you want to have some different color, let's do, I don't know, some purple hair with blue tips. You can play around and hit OK, and then if you go to render, you'll see the update of it. So you can spend hours and hours and hours doing different stuff with this. But basically people created fur, and what it is it's an emitter. Each hair is an emitter. And if you look, it's basically there's an emitter, and then it emits a sequence of particles that come off and go in that direction. Now that was one thing, and generally people kind of kept it at a minimal.